Welcome to Biceps and Banter with expert trainer Brandon Crow. Hold on to your dumbbells and get ready for this conversational style podcast focused on interesting, everyday drivel with tasty tidbits of health-related information sprinkled in. Enjoy.
Brandon,
Dave,
how's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
Man.
Good. Thank you.
All right.
Oh, you got the Vibrams on and everything.
I'm ready to go.
Look at you.
So what got you into podcasting?
I don't know. I think I just started listening to a lot of podcasts, and I thought, you know what? If they can do it, I can do it. Why not, right?
Yeah. Expose a lot of stuff that's people don't get exposure to.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what I'm going for, and I want to keep it Toronto-based, mostly anyway for now. Mm-hmm. So I train out of a place called Harmony Fitness. It's kind of Midtown Toronto, Forest Hill. They do a bunch of different classes, but the most popular one is the one I described to you, the half treadmill, half weights. Mm-hmm. We're also running one called Chiseled, which is only machines and dumbbells, no cardio or anything. Small group. It's like a small group personal training session. Mm-hmm. We get as many as like 15 people for the hour, and we run them through different exercises.
And so I guess the idea there is you get a clientele who wants to get the most done and as efficiently as possible,
yes.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
Put the stimulus on their muscles, get this adaptation they want, and I guess 30 minutes, or does it go longer?
It's an hour actually.
An hour, that's okay.
It's a lot of sets. Yeah. It's a lot of sets. I mean, they're.
I'd imagine the more they've done it, the more they pick it up, and
exactly.
They're adapting to it.
Exactly. So I do have a core group that has been pretty consistent every Tuesday morning, and then I have one Wednesday morning, Thursday morning. So I see the same people week in and week out. That's good. Then slowly but surely I'm seeing people, they're remembering the cues.
Yeah.
And almost like I have to, sometimes I'll just set my timer. Okay, go. I'm looking around. Like barely anybody needs correcting because they've done it so many times.
That's where they want to. It's where you want them to be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And whether it's one-on-one or a group setting like that, it does usually take time, right?
Yes.
Get the control aspect
yeah.
of what they're doing. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
So then the people that have done it so many times, I don't have to focus on them as much. If new people come into the class, I'll spend a little bit more of my time with the new people, so they get it down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find people adapt pretty quick to the exercise? Like, it's like, this. I mean, you're obviously making it harder all the time.
Yeah.
But like, because I find it hard in a group environment sometimes, right? Because you might have a couple of individuals that have maybe it's just a couple, but still they're kind of falling behind. And as we know, in the big picture, you need a lot of things on the outside of the exercise to adapt, right? So when they go home, what are they? How's their sleep and stuff? And so not everyone's coming with the same amount of juice or the ability to adapt, right?
Exactly.
So that's a challenge with group stuff that I've found, right?
Yeah.
Keeps you busy.
Keeps me busy.
Yeah, and that's the thing with exercise that I find so fulfilling is that, teaching exercise and the like is personal training is that it's problem solving all the time, right? So it's you identify, you're watching someone trying to control something that you've given them as a stimulus, and you're cueing them as best you can. Because everyone has different kind of control issues, right? Like it's not always going to be the same thing, right? So if you get a whole group of individuals, their issues of doing a particular thing are going to be completely different, right? So your mind is always in it, and it's the constant problem solving, right? It's not kind of the same old out of the can things that you need to keep doing, right? Yeah. So that's why I find it's like the more your mind is working, the easier it is, the easier the job is in a way, right? I mean, it's the more complex, the more you can see, the more your involvement in it, right? Which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's definitely some mental gymnastics, and also trying to remember, okay, this client does things this way, this client has this injury, this client, you have to almost remember to better serve them.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Thankfully, I mean, I do one-on-one, like right now, and I found that always a challenge with a group. So I'm just like, going to stick to one-on-one.
One-on-one is amazing for that.
Yeah. It's a different dynamic, and it's one-on-one isn't for everyone, just like group training isn't for everyone, right? So definitely, if people are interested in training and they want a group dynamic, and I kind of chose from a business perspective and a worldview that I only do one-on-one. So those people aren't going to fit the mold if they see exercise differently. It's all about what you want out of exercise. What is your experience, right? So I'm sure for you as well as myself, as you've got along in your career of exercise, you've changed your view of it, right? And clients are going to come to you for different experiences, and they're not going to be the same clients, right? I mean, sometimes one-on-one boot camps are a typical client who goes to boot camp is one who wants to get trained. They love the difficulty, they love the challenge, they love the exertion of it that they wouldn't get anywhere else. Maybe even if it was one-on-one, right? And they thrive on the group environment, which I think is a huge, the motivational component and the accountability of a group, right? Yeah, I find that, so it's definitely a different dynamic. Totally. One-on-one versus group training, right?
Totally.
I always say you can't out-exercise what you eat anyway. So, for me in particular, I've decided not to take on people whose goal is weight loss. That could be a side effect of the exercise, but you're always upfront about, this is a big lifestyle change, right? I mean, you gotta keep track of, what you eat and, how your sleep is. And this is gonna, the thermodynamics of your system, the calories in, calories out, and obviously the quality of your food and your ability to recover from this exercise, right? So yeah, it's interesting, going a little further with what people, what trainers choose to give their clients is really based on their own experiences and what their background is. So the way the fitness industry is, like me, I'm sure you got in this industry because you like exercise, or maybe you were into sports, and you're like, what? I love this recreationally. Maybe I can do this as a profession. But what happens is, we get this responsibility of, prescribing, in a sense, exercise, but we're only limited to our previous experience, right? So if my background is gymnastics, for example, or for me it's bodybuilding, right? So if I wish to be a gymnast, then all I know is gymnastic exercises. So if I have a 400-pound client, I don't know anything outside of my gymnastics exercise, and it doesn't matter how appropriate it is to the individual. And that's kind of really, when there's no real governing body or no oversight with, there's certain certifications out there that kind of give you a very, very basic understanding of stuff. They're not even real fundamentals, but they just try to lower the risk a little bit. But as a trainer, when you're certified in those things, you still kind of stick to what it is. If you're a former Olympic sprinter, you're going to give your 400-pound guy sprinting exercise that you did in training, right? So we all have the responsibility. I fall in the same, as a bodybuilder, I used to just give bodybuilding exercises when I was a trainer, and then you have yoga, and you have all these other brands of exercise. But what we kind of forget as trainers is, essentially, we got to get out of our box, right? Where we came from, and look at personal training is really personal, right? So it's, can we exit our box, our framework where we came from, and say, this individual that I have is different from this one, and therefore the exercises or nothing should be the same, right? And the better we get at looking, this happens with time and experience, right? The better we get at observing and collecting data, the better we can make decisions and exercise decisions that help the client get better, right? Whether that's strength or stability, flexibility, right? So yeah, you made a good point, right? It's like, do you, as a client of a trainer, do you want something built for you, or do you want what the last guy had with that trainer, right? And that's typically what you'll see in a gym, and it's no fault of any trainer. We just do what we know. Essentially, if we fall in love with exercise and exercises, certain ones we like, and we condemn others because maybe we don't understand the whole spectrum. Yeah. And so we can go from client to client kind of on automatic mode, thinking, oh, this exercise, the same exercises, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting.
It's amazing, and you really have to have an open mind and not be attached to any particular exercise or
it's tough, man.
It's tough.
What is their goal? Is it this experience that they love, that they've had in the past, and that might be it, or it might be, I want to be stronger. I want to be able to bend over and not have my back hurt, right? So maybe in that case where there's this, pain or mechanical limitation that they have, it might be a little bit easier to convince them, to have them be convinced, like, okay, all this exercise that I used to love, maybe it's not for me, and there needs to be an intervention. So we're going to do something else. But so maybe we can go back to that. We can raise someone's tolerance to stuff they've been doing in the past that we might not consider quote unquote good for them, right? So building up someone's capacity to do anything physical, and not, maybe a lot of people, older people, they want to play sports again, right? And golf for example, can be tough on the body, but not everyone, especially in their 40s and 50s and 60s, people that play golf, sometimes they don't have this tolerance anymore like they were when they're younger, and so the exercises that they used to do when they were younger, when they are exercising for golf, they can't tolerate it anymore. So it's a matter of this educating the consumer about, maybe we have to back up on this. If we can make this challenging, but kind of in this way, right? And from my experience, the more you actually believe in that as a trainer, the more it comes through to them, and they start to see, oh, I actually enjoy this as well, right? So some people don't enjoy, or people can't think of enjoying what they've never experienced, too, which is crazy, right? So, not all types of exercises for everyone.
So I do have a client fairly recently. I've been training her for maybe last year. Her goal is maybe 10 or 15 pounds of weight loss. That's like her main goal. So when she comes into the training session, she'll say, I don't want to bulk up my upper body, so if you want to do exercise, let's only do lower body, maybe some abs. I'm not doing any upper body. And I'll sneak in some upper body here and there. And when she's doing a bicep curl and she's complaining, oh, look how big my biceps are, they're bigger than yours, and like she's in the mindset of lifting weights is going to get her bulky, right? Oh yeah, these myths that you have to keep contending with the average consumer, right? It's a funny one because I get that, and you can't blame some consumers because they don't get this kind of upfront time with real experts. Again, it's this kind of brainwashing with the media and stuff. But it's funny. I've had people come into my office and they would state their goals, and I want to put some muscle on, but I don't want to look like you though. And they go, oh, thank you. And I don't know if that's a compliment, right? And just kind of this like ignorance in a sense that like it takes a lot of heart. If you do a few sets of upper body, right? You're not going to wake up tomorrow and like, shouldn't have done that yesterday. I'm that much bigger, right? Yeah. So it's almost like, and you've probably experienced this with the consumer, is that results, because of advertising stuff, results seem like they can be easy if you've never experienced it. It's like, no, I don't want to work upper body. I'm going to get too big. Whatever secret you have, please tell me. You know what I mean? That's exactly it. When somebody approaches me and says, I don't want to get too bulky, I'll say, I've been trying for 10 years to get bulky, and this is as big as I've gotten. That's funny. I've used that one a lot. Yeah. It's like, I think it's humbling when someone who starts exercise, they're like, oh, okay, I'm not, especially if they're female, they don't have the particular capacity generally to put on muscle, and they're the ones who are most scared of it, right? And they find, I'm actually getting tighter here, and it's
my muscles are getting more toned, as they would call it, and not really, I'm not getting bulky, and this is helping my fat loss, right? Yeah.
There's a girl that comes to my chisel class. She's been coming for maybe last 3 months straight, and I remember where she started and where she is now 3 months later, and it's amazing to see. She came in just like rail thin, and now she's starting to slowly put on a little bits of muscles, and you're starting to see it in the definition in the shoulders coming in, definition in the backs coming in.
Yeah.
Amazing to see.
Yeah.
And that's the type of stuff that gets me pretty fired up and excited.
Yeah, changing people's lives, right? Yeah, when they're committed to the process, right? And I'm sure you've had people who, as I have, through training, it's like, especially if someone's new, they don't know what type of commitment it takes to get that far, because it doesn't happen overnight, and some people think it does, right? And they're actually scared of it happening overnight, which is insane to us people who've been exercising for a while, right? Yeah. All right, ready for a walk.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about how you got started. So you mentioned you're an athlete, previous, like your teenage years. So where did that start?
Yeah, so I played just basketball in high school, and when I started working out for basketball, and when I realized I wasn't going to be 6'8" to do anything with it, I kind of just fell into the exercise part, and just kind of got into bodybuilding. Was kind of addicted to putting on muscle, and for that time, for narcissistic reasons, of course, right? Exactly. And and it went from there, and I kind of got interested in the whole personal training aspect, and how I actually worked at a gym when I was 17 or 18, and I was intrigued by how other people train, how different trainers are training, and one individual at this place I was working at, he was training a lot differently. So I asked him, where'd you get your training education? And I kind of followed a path which led me to where I am now, which is basically I started studying exercise mechanics while I was in university on the side. So I took kinesiology at York University, and started traveling all around the United States to go into courses and really getting into the study of exercise mechanics. Yeah,
that's amazing. I actually started same route too. Started with basketball, then to make my junior team. It was a really competitive team, so I thought, okay, I need to go to the gym, lift some weights, put on some muscle. So that's where I started, and then it's just started with every summer I would work out, and then during the school year not work out. And then I got more into it when I got to university. I studied biological sciences, and then after that went on to nuclear medicine.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's a course at U of T, and they're partnered with the Missioner. I took that. So that's 3 more years of schooling. But on the side, I was always doing personal training a little bit, just with either students or faculty members or friends of faculty members, just kind of doing part-time on the side.
Yeah.
I finished up my schooling. I did 8 months placement at a hospital, and I realized I didn't want to work at the hospital the rest of my life.
Is that right? It's not an environment that...
No.
What was it about it? Was it like kind of the energy?
The energy, right? People will go in there not in optimal health. And it's not really getting down at the root cause of things, right? So I realized I wanted to help people. I just wanted to help them before they got to the point where they needed to go to the hospital, right?
Right.
So I continued to do personal training. I was doing personal training that time at Good Life, where I met a client, started training her. She lost 60 pounds. She knew I wanted to open up a studio, so I went into partnership with her. Was there for a couple of years, and then, like I said, I floated around for a couple of years, and then started working with Harmony Fitness.
Okay, right
so
on.
That's like my whole
bio,
I guess.
It's funny, right? It's all these people involved in exercise in their career now kind of have a similar path, but kind of we go roundabout ways to getting where we are. Definitely started exercising when we were, through sports. That's very common, right? And we get into it. But yeah, so...
how long have you been RTS? You mentioned you've been 12 years in the entire industry.
Yeah.
From personal training onward.
Yeah, I think it's been maybe a little more than 12 years, but I got certified in mastery level RTS in 2008, I believe. And so RTS, for those who don't know, is, I'm sure, are you familiar with?
Yes.
Yeah, so Ben Pekulski, who you've talked to, he's been there.
Yeah, so maybe for the listeners, kind of talk about RTS, what is it? How you got involved with them.
Yeah, so RTS is really a resistance training specialist program. It breaks down exercise into its fundamental parts in regards to physics and exercise mechanics. So the understanding of force, joint structure in the body. So fundamentally breaking down exercises into the smallest pieces so you get a fundamental understanding. So, for example, when someone does a squat, when two people do a squat, and we call it squat, and you can instruct them to do it the same way. Typically, it's going to be a different stimulus, and so RTS really gets you to understand, what are the forces, what are the mechanics going on that make exercise different, unexercise or exercise different for every individual. And I think, exercise mechanics is the missing piece in exercise education. So I did kinesiology, or in other words, exercise science at York University, and the physical education programs, these kinesiology programs, these exercise science programs in university are very outdated. I mean, I found that out studying RTS at the same time, where these institutions have education that's literally 50 years old. So when you're studying biomechanics, you're doing trigonometry equations, but you can graduate from these programs and not know how to give someone an exercise. There's nothing really applicable to it. So exercise education now is fundamentally biased towards exercise physiology, right? So how many reps, how many sets, what's the rest time, lactic acid threshold, and all this stuff. But not many exercise programs talk about the fundamentals of the physics, the stimulus, right? What is force? How is this dumbbell curl different from this one? And that impacts the physiology. So you can't study or know the physiological impact of exercise truly until you know the understanding. You have this understanding of what the actual stimulus is, which is force.
Right.
So I think that's why RTS and the study of exercise mechanics is so important, and it really changes your client's experience and opens up a whole new level of exploration into exercise.
Exactly. And once the client starts to understand force, and the idea is not to make the exercise easy, just to perform a rep. The idea is actually to make the exercise as difficult as possible.
Yeah,
keeping
absolutely.
the muscle, challenging the muscle as much as possible.
Yeah, exercise is challenge, right? So that's kind of the definition, is physical exercise is a physical exertion that's essentially appropriate enough to stimulate change, right? So what do we see when we go to the gym and we see people exercise? Well, they're always avoiding challenge, right? So it's this, cheating and let's get 12 reps right? So my question is, what is a rep? Why are we aiming for 15 reps? If, it's not 15 reps, it's actually a lot of the times 15 sets of 1 rep of 15 different exercises, right? So, how precise can we be with our execution? Does that make sense? So if we've outlined what an exercise should look like,
right,
and we're doing rep by rep, are we controlling all the aspects to, again, fatigue, to challenge what we want to challenge, right? Yeah, so this whole control component is a big part of getting someone to be challenged to exert fatigue on whatever they want fatigued, right?
Yeah. So not an arbitrary number of reps. Maybe look at the exercise as a rep, 1 rep. Like you're trying to control the entire.
Yeah. So if your 7th rep looks a lot different than the first, then what's the point? Right? Because if your goal from the first rep was, I want to challenge these specific tissues and create an adaptation. Let's say you're working your lats, for example.
Yeah.
And by the time you've gotten to the 7th rep, you've lost the control necessary for your goal, which was at the beginning of the set. And the reason for that a lot of times is because you're aiming for a number. So oftentimes I never count reps with my clients, because how do you know how many reps someone can get? You don't know. It's in the future, right? So what if someone, doing the challenge optimally, because that's what we were just talking about, is the whole point of exercise is challenge, appropriate challenge. If they can only get 11, why are we asking them to do 15? But we don't know if they can do 11. They have to do it first. Does that make sense?
Right. And then you're watching to see how their body's breaking down and how tempo is changing, how the form and execution is changing. And once those things change, that's the end of the set.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like when you start an exercise, you create these conditions, and these conditions are specific to what you're looking for in the outcome, what you want out of the outcome of the exercise. So you want to be very precise as a trainer, in my mind, as to watching the execution, be very observant, and seeing where they need to improve, right? And not have them allow stray from the original conditions, right?
You don't count reps.
No. So,
but will you pick a weight, say for instance, to challenge them somewhere around a rep range?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, definitely there could be a rep range, right? So, typically, let's say, for example, in my head, I want someone to do 12 repetitions, right? What I tell them is, look, if we're not really going to count, but if it's around 8, we're good. If it's around 13, we're good.
Right.
Let's focus on speed and tempo, because remember, reps, we forget, is just a function of time, right? So, when we look at programs online, it says 12 reps, but it doesn't specify the tempo, which is really the time under tension, the length of the set, and people are chasing reps and not looking at how much time, and if you're not typically if you don't have skill in any motion, I mean, you're going to be uncontrolled aiming for a particular number.
Totally.
Right?
Like, did you do those 12 reps in 12 seconds, or did it take you 40, 50 seconds, time under tension? And you see that all the time in the gym. Even I'll see that sometimes in my classes. I'll specify, okay, you're going for around 10 to 15 reps. Start my timer, go. Look in 10 seconds in, somebody's already completed their entire set, right?
Yeah.
Just try to get it through it as fast as possible.
That's it, right? The number of reps don't matter. And so there's all these other variables in exercise. So particularly in mechanics, when you look at, it's more than just reps, right? So, and then when you talk of time under tension, we also have to be aware of, when we do a rep, is the amount of tension the same throughout the entire rep? And the answer is not typically, right? So, when you're doing a bicep curl, the bottom of the rep is not going to be nearly as much tension, with a dumbbell, as the middle, right? And so how much time are you spending at each point? How fast are you moving the weight? Because now there's going to be inertial properties of the resistance you're moving, right? So we see people swinging at a dumbbell curl, and why do they do that, right? Because we want to break the inertia of the dumbbell, of the weight, where it's easiest, which is going to be the bottom, where there's a smaller moment arm of resistance. So if someone does 15 dumbbell curls, and they're again now not accounting for inertia, and of course the way they're doing it, then once you look at mechanics, you start to see the number on the weight doesn't mean anything, or it means very little, right? Because there's all these other components in physics that we can begin to understand and really extrapolate from exercise, right? Yeah, you know what? I think that's, from my understanding, I mean, from my experience, that seems just to be human nature. We're kind of, obviously our lizard brain wants to make things easy all the time. That's kind of our prime directive as humans, but we're essentially always focused on external performance, right? So what is the number? What is the time? We use these as gauges to give us an idea how well we're doing. Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, we have internal performance, which is essentially how are we working internally? What's being used? Where is our focus? Right? So sports, for example, on one end is very externally performance. Does the puck go into the net? Right? Does the ball go into the hoop? Right? So that's where we focus. But I find through my experience with looking at mechanics and focus on getting people to focus on the inside is have people focus on the inside first. Get them to feel contractions. Get them used to the feeling of using their body, and not have them focus on how many reps, how much weight. To give you a simple example, we'll use basketball. I mean, we both played basketball. So, when you were young, you were taught essentially almost an internal performance aspect to focus on, your elbow, your shooting motion, and the flick of your wrist, and the timing with the jump. And you were practicing this on your own. It wasn't in a game, so you could focus on the internal. When you get into game time, hopefully you focused on the internal, that it's kind of your external performance gets better because it kind of meshes into one, right? So I think it's very important to see this as a spectrum. So I think where exercise is now, where it resides, is this external performance idea, like where we're tied to the amount of reps and how much more can we do. Where I think definitely as a beginner, if you're having on beginners on exercises, have them feel stuff. Be mindful of the control and the motion and how much time it's taking for a rep and where they're squeezing. And then if they feel like it, or if that's the direction you want to take them, given their objectives and how much they can tolerate, then you can have them push hard and they won't lose their form, similar to a jump shot in basketball, right? Where everything becomes, the internal performance becomes automatic and you don't have to think about it, but it does improve your external performance later on, right?
What do they call that? The conscience competence, where you do it automatically.
That's right. But I exercise is supposed to be about health, not about the outcomes, right? The external outcomes, right? Because the external outcomes are for sports, right? And it's what CrossFit is essentially. They call it the sport of exercise, which to me is kind of like a misnomer, right? It's like, exercise is not sports and sports aren't exercise, in a sense that, sports is activity, but it's not for a specific goal. It's to score points to win the game, so to speak, or beat a record. Whereas exercise is about appropriateness and some sort of change that you want from your body. So definitely I like the idea of this internal external performance perspective, right? And that really, when you get someone accustomed to feeling the inside, they start to disconnect from they start to really understand that the amount of weight that they're using really means nothing, right? It's just kind of some arbitrary gauge, which goes along with ego, and everyone wants to push more, and it makes them feel better when they see a bigger number.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. When I'm working with my clients, 1 week we might use 50 pounds for an exercise, and then I'll see them the week later, and we might move down to 40 or 45, and they're thinking, well, last week I was at 50, why'd you put me at 45 or 40? Say, well, on this particular day, it doesn't look like you can handle 50.
Yeah, you strayed from the conditions and the boundaries that we set for the exercise.
Yeah.
Right? So if someone is, they have to get a certain amount of reps, or I've done this 50, I need to do it. I mean, if they truly don't have it, they're going to figure out a way to do it, right? And it's up to us as trainers to be very aware and observant about these things, right? Because, getting back to exercise is kind of a health thing. If we look at exercise as an external performance thing all the time, what do you think is going to happen to the body over time? Because if we're looking constantly to keep increasing weight and increasing our performance faster than what the body will allow, and this is where these kind of, I'll call them injuries, but this is where the costs of exercise come in. Now, I don't call them, I'm hesitant when I call them injuries, because we see people exercising inappropriately. Like at the gym, we just see them, not doing good form, and oftentimes the risks and costs of exercise, they're insidious, right? So you don't see them, and it's actually a shame, because if more people got acutely injured, people would be more careful. Like if people just all of a sudden tore something when they weren't doing something. But that's typically not the case when it comes to injury in a gym. Where the actual costs happen is, they're very insidious. They happen over time. If you did a poll, I've done this, you go to a big commercial gym and you just start asking people, let's say men in their 40s who seem to be extremely fit, they've been working out for 20 years, and you get asking them, how do you feel, and what they'll tell you is, as good a shape as they look, they'll tell you that, my back hurts, and I can't run anymore because this knee thing, right? I've had arthroscopy, and you start seeing like this mechanical system which they reside in. That's their body. It breaks down just like a car. So if you race your car, if you have let's say, call it a Toyota Corolla, not meant for racing, but you take it to the racetrack year after year after year, and you're not looking into those components inside the car. The engine's the way it is. It's wearing down. The car won't last. And a lot of people are, they've been exercising really hard for a long time, and they're driving beat up Corollas of their body, right?
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, you kind of have to look internally inside the car, your own body, and say, let's look at exercise internally to make things better rather than track it all the time. And if we, right, rather than take it to the racetrack and really beat it up.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I see exercise in the body is, I want people to be internally focused before externally.
Yeah.
Right?
And the younger you can educate people on that process, the better they're going to be long term.
Absolutely.
Because you might pull that same 40-year-old man, and if he's been doing things right since he was 20, he won't have those same, back injuries, knee injuries, elbow injuries, and
yeah, absolutely. And once the wear and tear has happened on these, cartilage, it either doesn't come back or it takes a long time, right? So once your connective tissues have kind of gone on you, it's really hard to. So yeah, absolutely, it's best to get it at a young age so you can, preserve your material continuum in your system, right? Yeah. So when some people, they've been exercising, whether they have been exercising or not, and they're reporting pain in some part of their body, most people they can't, unless you pulled it or you did something acutely. It's kind of like this chronic thing that they can't identify where it came from. And that's the insidious effect of exercises. Let's say you've been doing some squats and compensating and haven't been doing within some constraints of the way you should be doing it optimally. Well, what happens is certain tissues in your body are going to start getting overstressed, and your motor control system, so the sensory, the proprioception coming from your periphery back to the central nervous system, and your central nervous system firing motor units to the muscles. This starts shifting, right? So your body's going to always try to find solutions, which is compensation, if some things aren't working properly, if some things are too stressed. And over time, it's kind of like a cancer. It starts spreading and spreading and spreading, and before you know it, you got maybe a tendon that's inflamed, and it's tendonitis, or you got some cartilage worn out because your knee's been diving in, and your muscular system hasn't been able to stabilize it appropriately because you've stressed out the joint, right? So yeah, this is the cost of exercise that people need to be aware of, right? And you live in a mechanical body that gets really warmed out, and you got to take care of it, right?
Yeah.
So, as a muscular system specialist, what I'm, and it's basically looking from an exercise perspective. The tool as exercise is kind of a different perspective, is isolated versus integrated, right? So we know there's a big thing in exercise now, functional exercise, where I know it's called a marketing term, I guess, functional exercise, where everything seems to be integrated. The more joints that are working, the better, the more functional, the more lifelike it is, and therefore the better it is for you. But I kind of see things as integration is really the link of all these isolated parts. And so the integration can only be as good as the pieces of the integration, right?
Yeah.
So what we're able to do in exercise now is find the isolated pieces that need work before you put the integration together, right? So if you're doing a squat, which involves all these muscles, all these joints, and maybe you're not symmetrical on any one of those joints, or you've lost some motor control because of a stress, trauma, injury, overuse to any muscles, essentially, it's whenever you do a squat, it's not going to be appropriate. Some other tissues are going to be working more than others, and again, that kind of spreads through your system. But so functional training can actually make people less functional, and typically it does, because you're trying to work an integration that can't possibly work optimally because all the little pieces haven't been looked at. Right?
What's the point of doing a squat on a Bosu ball when you can't do a proper squat on the floor, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it goes that far, right? That's exactly right, and a lot of people can't even do a proper squat. Well, I should say most optimal, right? So if they're already compensating, and let's say you're missing some ankle motion on your left side, maybe you'd sprained it, when you were 12 years old, and now you're 30, and you're missing motion on that left side, and your squat starts breaking down because of one little piece. But the whole time we've been kind of told, all these multi-joint motions are so much better, right? And it's going to make you stronger to strengthen the whole thing, when really maybe one piece of your body needs more care, and it might not be symmetrical, right? So as a muscle system specialist, try to look at what parts of your body, what muscles, what joints have lost motor control, have lost the communication, and restore those with what I call exercise with a scalpel, very precise. And we're able to qualify motor control to measure it to see that it's better qualitatively. And what we do see is when muscles fire better, the joint moves better. And when you start doing integrated exercise, it looks completely different and it feels different, and the stimulus is different. So we can't count, when we do functional exercise, we can't count on everything working the same or optimally. And that's the trend I see in exercise is, bigger is better. And it's just not the case. So, looking at exercise through this glass of, through this window of, is everything working the way it should? And can we choose exercises appropriately to make your body function better as a whole?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what works for one person is not going to work for another.
Never.
Never.
Yeah.
Right. That's what makes it fun.
Yeah.
It's almost like a personal training detective. You have to find out, the backstory, and you have to be very observant.
And even just choosing things, checking out motion and saying, we can get into this topic of stretching versus not, this range of motion. Why is your right side different from your left, right? And it might not be as simple as this muscle needs to be stretched, but muscles typically don't stretch, right? I mean, they're connective tissues that don't have much give, and what allows them to lengthen is really the nervous system allowing tension or not having tension. And if the nervous system chooses to make something tighter than maybe what we want, there might be a reason for that.
Yeah.
Generally, that's stability.
Yeah,
right?
it's like a protective mechanism. I've heard Greg Roskoff.
Yes.
He'll say, when you step on a sheet of ice, what happens? Your entire body tenses up.
Yep.
And is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Okay. So when we're on an unstable surface, when we're walking on ice, the body will choose less mobility in the favor of stability because the conditions are making it so, we're on we need stability. We can't move. So that's an example of the entire system, but it's also happening on a joint by joint basis. So if you've lost motor control in a certain range of motion in your body, well, certain muscles are going to tighten up to not allow you where you don't have control, right? So if we choose to stretch and do flexibility training, we could be making ourselves vulnerable to injury because we're opening up range of motion that otherwise your body, your brain did not want to allow, right? So in my experience, I mean, the people who've had the most pain and instability are gymnasts, figure skaters, dancers, those who were stretching for more and more range, and really stretching being a negotiation of the nervous system to loosen up tissue. Well, they've opened up their ranges to the point where the brain is not communicating active motion in those areas, right? So I don't, as a muscle system specialist, I don't really care that you can bring you can lift your knee to your face standing up with your arm. I want to know, can you do that under your own control, right? Can your brain do that by itself? Right.
So one thing I've seen Ben do with a squat is he'll have the person stand upright, and then they'll bring their knee as high as they can to their chest, basically showing them that that's what you can control actively without any load. So when you go into the squat, remember that range, because anything else, it's just pushing you into a position you shouldn't be in.
Yes. Yeah. So measure, when you're doing any exercise, you want to measure actively at each joint. Let's say in a squat, you want to measure how much can I move my ankle in dorsiflexion? How much can I lift my leg up from my hip, right? So those are two motions you want to look at in a squat, and you don't want to go passively into those motions because the resistance, the bar, and the body weight is taking you there, right? So you don't want to visit these vulnerable ranges that you don't have control over. So yeah, he's right. And as far as finding your active motion, and that's really the window that you want to be exercising in. Not doing chest flies on a machine and setting the machine to all this stretch, and you try to get as much motion as possible, because that's another thing in the industry that's been kind of pushed down our throats, right? Is essentially full range of motion. Full range of what motion?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Your passive motion or your active, right? And that's
I was having this conversation with another trainer at the gym, because I had been telling certain clients, okay, at the top of a chest press, you don't need to touch the dumbbells together. And then he said to me, well, can you show me how you do a chest press? So I showed him how I do a chest press, not with the dumbbells touching. And he says, well, that's not a full range of motion.
Yeah.
And I said, well, a full range of motion for what? Like, what are you trying to challenge in this exercise? For this particular exercise, I want to keep my chest under tension the entire time, so I'm not holding out at the top, right? Yeah,
and you can even argue that touching the dumbbells isn't even full range of motion, because you chose to touch them and not cross over the dumbbells, which would give you full range of motion,
Correct,
but the opposite resistance on the joint, right? Because
Right,
at that point you'll be working the other side of the axis, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's funny how we see, range of motion is it's so arbitrary, right? I mean, that's not because it's dumbbell bench press, but it's like you're not thinking about the joint, and you're not thinking about the resistance, as you mentioned, right? There's no resistance up there, so why do we need to visit it? Maybe you want to, maybe you don't. But yeah, and so these are kind of like the exercise rules that the industry try to make things simple for individuals to participate in, right?
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Wow, great conversation.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, good,
That was
man.
a nice walk.
Yeah.
Got a lot of sun.
Yeah, thank you for that. Where can people find you?
So my website is currently being reconstructed, but they can find me at strategicmusclesystems.com, and they can find me on Facebook, Dave Freiday. The website should be coming out, and
Great.
you can if you have any questions about what we talked about today, you can reach me on Facebook.
That's perfect. All right. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, man.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to Biceps and Banter with Brandon Crow. If you like our show, do us a huge subscribe, toss a review on iTunes, or maybe share the show with your friends. And if you want to know more, find us at fastingftw.com. Our Patreon is patreon.com/fastingftw.